Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. I am Carlos El Chacon, your host, and I'm joined today. We are joined today by a special guest, Sam Nasr. How are you, sir?
Very good, Carlos. How are you?
Very good. I know that this time of year, I know this because I talked to you before we hit record, that you're enjoying the sunny time of Cleveland, Ohio, and so it's good to have you back on the program.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Indeed. I have my fearless co-hosts, Mr. Kevin Fiesel.
Hello.
And Mr. Eugene Meininger.
Howdy, howdy.
Recently back from family reunion, right? Live to tell the tale.
That's right.
So it can be done, folks.
Virginia's not that dangerous. I don't know what.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay, so today's episode, we are going to be talking about Azure Cognitive Services, right? So we're going a little bit outside the mold today as we think about, as we prepare ultimately for episode 256. We thought we'd sprinkle in some pieces. Sam and I, we were actually chatting on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what it was. And then it was like, hey, we need to get you back on, right? And he's like, well, I want to talk about Azure Cognitive Services. That may or may not roll. And I'm like, we can make it roll, right? We will put it in the sushi and we'll make it roll.
That's the attitude.
There we go. So our show notes for today's episode are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/Azure Cognitive or at SQLDataPartners.com/episode 251. Don't forget, compañeros, that you can support the podcast by going to SQLDataPartners.com/t-shirt and ordering your very own SQL Data Partners Podcast t-shirt while they last. Nice. Limited supply, right? You don't want to be left off guard when the zombie apocalypse happens, right? These are zombie-proof t-shirts. So just so you know. Right? Money back guaranteed.
Is this where we have to say the FDA? We are not an FDA licensed anti-zombie suppressant?
Thank you. Yes. I don't have to because I knew you would say it there. So, yeah.
The legal department chimes in yet again. Remember, you don't have to sue Carlos to get his pants off. No, wait. That was a real old Simpsons reference. That's going way back to when they were funny.
Okay, so before we get into today's episode, I do have a couple of shout outs that I want to go through. So we've got shout outs for Menza Jose, Hilda Alvarez, Marlies Peterson, Vinod Baski, Menodi Hassan, Rahul Jaswal, Fabrico Faz, John Sterrett, Akraf Afez, Aviv F. Gunawan, Fearman, Ardid Wajan, HM Computer Solutions, Hassan Margabel, Muhammad Rifki, Sandeep Pawar, Fred Kaffenberger, Jana, right? He just bought one name, right? Jana is just he's at one name level. Alan Evans, Jamie Lund, and Lynn Swayze. So thanks, compañeros, for reaching out and engaging with us in some way in social media. We do appreciate it as always. Give us a little love there. Okay, so we're all interested now to hear a little bit about Azure Cognitive Services. Okay. And like most Azure services, the marketing buzz is strong with this one, Sam, right? And it is all your artificial intelligence needs wrapped up in an API, right? That's
beautifully said.
I mean, at least some of your needs. Some percentage.
So then take us through, right? For those who are not familiar, right? Give us the nickel tour of what Azure Cognitive Services is and why folks might be wanting to use it.
Okay, so starting at a 30,000 foot perspective, I'll give you the nickel tour. Basically, it's a suite of packages or services rather that is divided up into 5 categories: speech, language, vision, decision making, and last but not least, the latest one is OpenAI service. And these are all services that allow you to train a model, and then once you have the model trained, then it can recognize things as a human would, whether that be spoken phrase or an item within a specific image, or being able to decipher text depending on the language that you're using, and it can reply back with the specific token of what the user's intending on doing. So one example that I've done before is using what appears to be a kiosk at a car dealership. What are the various things you can do at a car dealership? You can buy a car, you can trade in your vehicle, you can get your vehicle serviced. And if you go in to buy a car, you can say, I want to buy a car, sell me a vehicle, or I'm looking for a red Corvette, for example. All three are different sentence structures, but you can train the language understanding service so that it would understand the intention of what the user is after. And so if they type in that specific text, whether it's I want to buy a car, I'm looking for a red Corvette, or what have you, or anything along those lines, it will decipher that and reply back with a token that you would assign it. And in the example that I used, it was just simply buy car. So once you get the token back from the service, knowing what the user's intention is, then you can follow your flow within your application. And in the example that I demonstrated, it was basically querying the inventory that we had and saying we have 10 Corvettes in stock, for example. We have a convertible, we have a red one, and then you can carry on the dialogue from that point on. So you're utilizing these services to be able to do human interpretation on it. And again, it could be applied to language, to vision, and a variety of other things as well.
There you go. So that interesting piece, or what was maybe lacking a little bit, was it's like, oh, all you need is an API, but you did use that word train, right? So anytime I think about artificial intelligence, right, you think about the model. It all comes down to the model and what you want it to kind of do for you. And it sounds like you still had to go through that process, right, for this to ultimately be successful. But you didn't necessarily have to program a bunch of, in this case, language interpretation pieces. That could be all just captured, and then and that was kind of the benefit of the interaction then.
Correct. So I don't have to roll up my sleeves and get into mathematical formulas as a data science expert. I just simply make an API call after I train my model. So let's take a closer look at the whole training the model type thing.
Sure.
So going along the lines of LUIS, or the Language Understanding Intelligence Service, what I would be doing is I would set up my Azure account. That's step number one. And then I would get keys, right? And then
Microsoft wants their money, right? You need credit card, must be entered first.
But hats off to them. They do offer some free credit if you want to experiment with it. And then in addition, there's also a free tier within each service that you can utilize to experiment with. So after I set up my account and I have my keys, then I go over to a portal. And in this case, it would be LUIS.ai. And then from there, I would train it on a variety of different phrases that would pertain to a specific intention. So buying a car, for example, if I want to get my car serviced, I could say I want an oil change, and the intention there would be service car. Or I want new tires. That would also be the intention of service car. So I train it on all these different intentions with a variety of different phrases. And then once I'm confident that it is going to be working right, then I can deploy it and then be able to access that endpoint through my code. So essentially, I set up an Azure account, I go to the portal, train the model, and then I call that model using an HTTPS endpoint that's going to be given to me. I use that in my code, and then I get a JSON result set back. I dissect that to get what the user's intention is, and then I'm off and running in my application to do what it is that I'm after.
Sure, you kind of go to the next step, and there might be another model there, right, to then do the next thing.
Well, not necessarily another model, but it would be finding out what the user's intention is and then responding accordingly. So if they want to buy a car, I would display inventory. If they want to have some kind of a service done, I would get them scheduled. I would show them the calendar of the free available times. I would essentially act accordingly to what the user's intention is.
Gotcha.
So that's from a very high level perspective. Now, if you dive into it a little bit deeper, you can also assign certain adjectives within that sentence. So I can identify if the user is looking for a specific color car, if they're looking for a specific trim edition, whether it's the GT or XL or what have you. And then likewise, I can query my inventory for those items as well.
Now, Kevin, you said mostly, right? Sam's like he's doing a pretty good job, right? He's off and running. What's he lacking here
then? So taking tongue out of cheek. Yeah, no, there are still major gaps, but where Azure Cognitive Services I think does really well is in the applied machine learning space. You have a very specific problem that a lot of people have, and you don't necessarily know the exact techniques to solve this kind of a problem. So like Sam's example of Lewis, I want to interpret some free-form statement from an end user and try to turn it into something that I can provide information back to them or provide a service to them. That's a pretty common business problem. We've seen the bot movement. I'm not a huge fan of bots personally, but there are a lot of companies that have adopted that concept as a friendly chat service, and so that's pretty common. Or you have something like, say, Azure Search, which is part of Cognitive Services now, and being able to search for documents, being able to try to find specific text in documents, and essentially it's Elasticsearch in Azure. Or you have anomaly detection. So I have data that is time series in a particular format, and I need to find anomalies in there. Well, if your data is in a different format, or if it's not time series, then this Azure anomaly detection doesn't really work. It requires time series data, which means that if you're in a case where I'm working with data that's not time series, I'm going to go and create it myself. And that's where you move out of Azure Cognitive Services, move into Azure Machine Learning, or you build models on premises. At that point, you kind of ramp up in difficulty. The really nice thing about Cognitive Services is anomaly detection is an API call. So if you're a developer and you just need to make a call, it's right there. It's readily available. You're going to be able to get the information back. You'll be able to make sense of the information. The services do tend to be very well documented. They do explain. You're going to have to do some reading of the docs to understand what certain measures indicate, what certain outputs indicate, but that data is available, and it's intended for developers who are not necessarily domain experts in the machine learning topic. So in that regard, very happy that it exists. I think it does solve that floor of I need to get a product out that requires some sort of machine learning work, a cognitive service, a ability to operate on sensory data and provide outputs. But I don't necessarily want to spend the 3 years to learn all the details myself, build this thing out, manage it, and etc.
Sure.
So for that extent, I do like Cognitive Services a lot. You have to understand that it's not going to solve every problem, nor is it intended to solve every problem.
Right.
Just like all the other Azure services, right? It has kind of a narrow purpose and a window of folks it's gonna help. Now, so again, knuckle dragging Neanderthal that I am, anomaly detection was mentioned, right? But and this is maybe where the dots just don't connect for me. Is this because I've trained the model? And maybe your example of the car dealership is not the best one, right? But because I guess
Not for
what would the
anomaly
anomaly
detection,
be like?
no.
I want a purple car. I want a, I don't know, neon pink car or something like, or what would
That's
So
more for. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think part of the problem with, at least from as an outsider view, and both of y'all can correct me, one of the problems with the marketing and branding and understanding for Azure Cognitive Services is one of the similar issues you have with Azure, where it's like the junk drawer of APIs, right? like they call it this one thing, but from what I understand, it's this umbrella branding for a bunch of different API services, right? And so the language detection with Lewis has absolutely nothing to do with the anomaly detection kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, the way that I would treat it is as a suite of different services that have their own pricing, their own management. But the whole idea is that Microsoft is going to provide more and more and more things that they can do for you, right?
Through the API.
Yes.
Exactly.
Think about like Microsoft Office back in 1997, where you could check Word and Excel and PowerPoint and Access and Visio and all these other things, and they add more services over time. These services aren't related. To Eugene's point, yeah,
right.
Word and Excel don't share the same code base. They're different products. They're themed differently. They're operated differently. They interoperate to some extent sometimes, but we treat those as different applications as part of a suite. And cognitive services, very similar concept. This is a set of APIs. It's part of a suite solving a common theme. There's a motif to the services, and it is intended to be, what are operations that a human does that we might want to try to automate?
Does that seem fair, Sam?
Oh, absolutely. And like I mentioned earlier, it's divided into 5 different categories. So yeah, certainly they may not be all tied together, but they do provide 5 separate types of services, if you will. And even within each category, there are some subcategories as well. So if we're looking at speech, we have text-to-speech, speech-to-text, translation, speaker recognition. So there are subcategories involved with that. And each subcategory has its own independent way of being utilized.
Yep. Actually, on that topic, speech to text and text to speech and translation. If you have not used the translation service, Microsoft does have a website where you can set it up, and I could speak in English, Carlos could speak in Spanish, Eugene could speak in Klingon, and we would be able to translate through this application, and whatever Carlos and Eugene say would be translated to English for me. Whatever I say would be translated to the appropriate languages for them. I have used this with courses where I've been working with Japanese students, and it works fairly well. Japanese is a very difficult language to translate back and forth to English, and within the constraints of how difficult that language translation is, it worked well enough that I could understand what they were saying most of the time. They could understand what I was saying most of the time. And so yeah, I can recommend trying out that translation service.
So do you have any other favorites then, Sam, that are, that you mentioned, 1 or 2? Do you have any other go-tos that you feel like are
Lewis is definitely Lewis is definitely my favorite, but another one that I'm fond of is the Vision service. And the reason I find that interesting is because if you have a customer portal or a kiosk where basically customers, specifically for DIYers, they want an oil filter, but they don't know that it's called an oil filter, right? They're going to come in and they're going to say, give me this thing, whatever it is, right? So the nice thing about it is you can take a picture of it, upload it, and it will identify that, hey, this is an oil filter. And likewise, with the same as Lewis, we can say, well, we have X number of oil filters in stock, right? So it gives the ability to interact with it. Even more importantly, aside from the retail aspect of it, what I found very interesting and what got me to gravitate towards cognitive services, back in 2016, I believe it was at the Ignite conference, where one of the engineers at Microsoft, who's actually legally blind, was using a lot of these services. And the video showed him where he was basically going through the streets of London, holding up his phone, and it was describing the environment around him, that there's someone, on a skateboard doing tricks, and then he goes to a restaurant and sits down, and then his colleagues join him, and he holds up the phone, and it tells him there's a lady smiling, there's a gentleman frowning, and it describes what's around him. He holds it up to the menu, and it reads it to him verbally. So it's nice to see that these things can actually be used to help humanity as a whole instead of just the wow factor. Certainly the wow factor is a big selling point for some customers, but it's nice to see that it's actually using technology to make life easier for others.
Yep. So on that, there are two separate use cases I think are really interesting in that one of them is, I'd say, specially trained. The other one is not specially trained. So the service where, hey, I'm just holding up the phone and have Azure Cognitive Services explain to me what is happening in this scene, or holding the menu and having it do the translation. This is not something that you train. So you don't have to work with the restaurant owner to translate the menu or to try thousands of translated menus. Whereas the oil filter example, the custom vision example, that is a training scenario where, okay, we're going to have this photo. We'll have a bunch of photos of oil filters. We'll tag them as oil filter. We'll tag them with brand. We'll tag them with model number, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can take a picture of an oil filter and say, oh, okay, this is an oil filter. This is a manifold exhaust valve. This is blah, blah, blah. And that's more of, it's still not something where you as a developer have to train a custom model. It's more of you have to get the right input data. You have to tag it correctly, get the right labels, and then you can use the service more effectively because by default, the general model that Azure is going to use for things like recognizing people, recognizing emotions, recognizing landmarks. You hold the phone up, it'll say, this is Big Ben. And recognizing famous people. There actually are specific rules around person recognition. So famous people, celebrities, it will recognize, like, this is Satya Nadella. This is a famous politician. This is whomever. But for Carlos, because Carlos is only mildly famous instead of wildly famous.
Yes, on the D list, right?
It will protect his privacy and will say, a very handsome gentleman.
That's very kind of you, Kevin.
But again, that's actually all trained by Microsoft. So you kind of have those two separate spaces, and where if you want, for your business, if you have a need for more in-depth training, like, because that model's not going to have details on auto parts, details on a lot of different things that companies may be selling, but it will have the capability to understand them if you provide sufficient labeled data.
Correct. And going off on that point as well, in addition to the models that you do train, you can incorporate pre-trained models within that model as well.
Yeah.
For example, let's say that we're doing a kiosk for traveling, and obviously geography and countries is a finite data set. So you can bring that into your Lewis model and identify the country as part of a finite data set and import the list of countries as defined by Microsoft. Likewise, days of the week, months of the year. So there are predefined models that you can import and utilize within your model as you're training it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's neat. So you had mentioned, hey, I don't have to take 3 years to build the model, right? So what's the, I don't know, I know every project is different, right? But, so this is going to be, you have to take a generality, right? When we say this, but yeah, what's been your, the speed increase time, if you will, right? Like, what's that been for you as you've implemented these? I mean, I guess it's easy enough to say, well, now it's possible, whereas before I'd have to go figure that out and, like you mentioned, build it myself.
Right.
And now it's possible. I guess.
So I will give you the ubiquitous developer answer, which is it depends.
Of course.
So I've used Lewis before, and it was very quick and easy to catch on to certain phrases that were like the phrases that I trained it on, meaning I trained it on a handful of phrases, and it was able to understand other phrases that I threw at it with the same intention.
Okay.
But Vision Service, on the other hand, with the oil filter, that took a lot more training. And keep in mind that as Kevin mentioned earlier, you need to train it on different types of oil filters. If you go to the auto store, they come in a variety of different vendors, variety of different sizes. So you got to train it on all that. And then to complicate things even more, lighting angle, is the oil filter installed on the vehicle or is it off the vehicle? So for a human, it's very easy to recognize it, but for a machine to be able to capture that device out of an image, it's a little bit tricky. So again, it depends on which model you're training it on, whether it's the language or speech or any of the others. It may vary and it may take longer than others.
Yeah, for people who are not on video, I did a little hand motion to indicate that another thing to remember is a person taking the picture while holding it, because are there other objects in the photo? So if all of your photos are just oil filters that are product placement style, where you're shot by a professional photographer with perfect lighting, stood exactly right, kind of on a clear box where you don't actually see anything except the filter, then as soon as you have a photo of a person holding an oil filter, that may make it a lot more difficult to translate what is this thing. So having photos in different levels of quality, exactly like Sam said, you want different levels of lighting, you want different angles, you want different other things, because the models will focus on small differences. And if all of your shots are professional and all of your uploads are not professional, then you may have a more difficult time getting good results. And as far as time to delivery goes, I totally agree with Sam. It's going to depend. I will say, for a custom developed, we want something done for my team, we're usually talking about 2 to 3 months of research where we're deciding, is this possible? Can we get a model that is going to fit business requirements, that is going to fit business needs, that is going to be achievable and desirable? And then if we can get to that point and it's successful, then we talk about implementation, which, depending on what that level of implementation is, could be anywhere from another month or so to 4 to 6 months. So you may be talking about a 6 to 12 month project for a data science team for a reasonably complex solution. And if there's something that's readily available in cognitive services or in SageMaker or in some other service that can cut down the initial research time, turn it from 3 months to 3 weeks, because you still need to understand, is the quality of the output going to be sufficient for resolving whatever problem the business has? Because even if you have a lot of pictures, maybe you have a very specialized niche where for some reason the vision service just doesn't work very well. Maybe you're selling t-shirts. You only sell t-shirts and you want to have t-shirts labeled based off of logos. And there's just so many different types of t-shirts that apply, and people start looking for specific t-shirts and the vision service just can't figure it out. It just doesn't have enough information to differentiate. Then you find that out, you say, okay, we can't use this, we move on. So there's still some time involved in the process of understanding, is this a valid solution? But if you hit it right, you could save a significant amount of time, reduce that upfront research portion. You're probably doing less reduction of the follow-on implementation because you're still implementing a service. You're still making API calls. You still have to do all of the relevant checks, make sure you're not rate limited, make sure that the service succeeded, implement retry logic, do everything that you would do in a regular application that is accessing APIs.
So what do the tiers look like? I mean, are they, you mentioned them being fairly generous, having a free tier, right? But does that, does the knob get tuned up pretty quickly, or what's your experience been there?
Again, it depends on the service. There are different tiers that are available within each service and different pricing models, so I can't give you a blanket statement there. But I think from what I've seen with Lewis, the knob goes up relatively slowly. It is not a huge surge in price. And again, it varies from model to model. I wanted to go back to a point that Kevin had mentioned. Sorry, Kevin, momentary lapse of memory there. But so you can train it as best as you can. But I found what works out best is you can do one of two things. Like one portal we were working with a client where it was for an executive dashboard. So you can issue a specific set of phrases that they can dictate to the application verbally, such as in the case with Lewis, and we can work just with those given set of phrases. And it's going to be an application that's going to be running for a specific set of a group of people. It's not publicly available. So you can train your end users to say, use one of these phrases or something similar to it, and you can easily reach your minimum viable product that way. Another thing you could do for testing is if you're opening up your product to the public, is to open it up to a smaller subset first, kind of do your beta testing, make sure that you've identified all the possible scenarios through that beta group before turning it on to the group at large. So that kind of eases your way into getting into production. You don't necessarily have to spend a 12-month project immediately before releasing your beta. Again, it varies from one scenario to the other, but there are different ways of approaching it.
There you go. So in terms of, because there are so many services, right? I guess any tips or pointers on here's how not to get overwhelmed by going through, all of these, or?
So I would say start small in the sense that if you look at the speech services, you can combine multiple services together. So we talked about Lewis, where you can actually type in a key phrase. You can also piggyback another service on the front end of that, where you're doing speech to text, where it will take spoken language, convert it to text, and then send that text over to Lewis. Lewis will then respond back with a token to your application. Your application could then come up with the appropriate text to say to the user, and then you could use the text-to-speech service on top of that. So essentially, you're chaining three services all in one. That's really designing your sexy version of the app, right? No need to start with that right away. Just start small, work on the Lewis model, get that fined and tuned, and then send that off, and then you can add on to it later. One example I always like to give to project managers is when they first started flying, the Wright brothers didn't go for a cross-country trip or across Atlantic, right? It was a 12-second flight. We demonstrated we can be up in the air, and then let's work and fine-tune and do better. But let's not bite off more than we can chew from the get-go.
I'm not sure anybody's ever had that problem, Sam, right? The IT projects, right? No, they seem to be very modest in size, right? So I should put out a plug, right, compañeros? So if your organization is looking to get started with cognitive services, or you have some questions, feel free to reach out to Sam, right? Sam is available, works for himself, and has an organization that can assist here, and so it may be, and obviously he's been with us. He's a nice guy. He'll listen to your jokes and chuckle, and can I help you walk through some of that if that's an interest that you have. So,
absolutely. In addition, a shameless plug, if I may, we also offer education courses and cognitive services as well. So not only can we get you off the ground up and running, but we can also instruct the staff on making changes going forward as well.
Yeah, so anytime you can push the go faster button, right, with good people, it's well worth it, right? Help guide and direct. Okay, so I'm kind of interested in doing SQL Family, but any last minute pieces here, or anything we need to remember before we move on? No. Okay, so Sam, these have changed up a little bit, and I think we asked you last time, but we'll ask it again because we like this question. So how did you first get started with SQL Server?
So this goes back to a company that I was working for. We were doing logistics, and they bought a really horrible third-party product that was using SQL Server 2005. And so I was forced to go on the back end many times and be able to fix things, and was introduced to SQL Server that way. Loved the product, found out that it's capable of many things, very easy to use, a lot of documentation, a huge community around it, and fell in love with it. And just kept pushing more and more into it.
Kind of went from there, and that's very telling, right? That you were able to separate the vendor product from the SQL Server, because a lot of times they tend to get tied to each other. Oh, that SQL Server is horrible.
Right,
well, right. Yeah. Okay. What would you do if you had to career? I butchered that one. What would you do if you had to change careers?
Well, I would say probably electrical engineering, but that's kind of cheating because it's along the lines of how I started in this business. True. But if I had to do something completely different, I would probably say airline pilot.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, heck, it's not too late. There's a shortage, right? You go get the LASIK, and you'll be up and flying in no time.
Absolutely.
What's the one thing that can instantly make your day better?
This is going to sound uber nerdy, but I would say learning a new technology or a programming language or a tip and trick on how to solve things in the programming world. That just very invigorating.
Yes, when it clicks, it's like, yes. There you go.
Look what I can do now.
That's right. Now, what's your go-to song when you need to boost your mood?
High Hopes by Panic at the Disco. And I love that song because in it he says, Mama said, and she had high hopes for him and she believed in him. Reminds me of my late mother, who also had believed in me very much. So brings back a lot of good memories. And I love the fact that it's very positive and kind of aim for the sky type of attitude.
There you go. Very cool. So now, Sam, do you have a bucket list?
Huge one.
Huge one. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So we used to say, tell us your weirdest thing on your bucket list, but give us I don't know what you're working on next. Something on your bucket list you want to share with us.
I'm not working on it next, but eventually I would like to do it. When and where, I don't know. And this would be flying with a wingsuit. I've seen all the Red Bull team do it multiple times. I'm like, oh, it's easy. I can do that. It's just a matter of getting the guts to actually step on a cliff and do it. But
yes.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is getting to that point of standing on the cliff.
Yeah, I mean, now, so I guess when I hear that, I think of cliff diving. Are they different, or is it the same?
So it's similar to it in the sense you put on a wingsuit and you're basically one huge wing
Right.
from your hands to your feet, and you got to keep your hands extended. And then you jump off the cliff and you gain some velocity, and you have some airlift, and then you're just zooming. You're basically gliding all the way down, not vertically but more horizontally. So you can control your descent, your speed. God forbid, should you have an itch on your nose and you got to pull in one arm, you're gonna lose. You're gonna drop like a rock.
Yeah, no itching. Wow. There is no itching on this flight. Yeah.
That's the tough part too. Yeah. So you keep your arms extended out, and you're gonna be soaring like an eagle.
There you go.
Hopefully,
that's
no treats will meet you.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Very good. Now, our last question for you today, Sam. What's your favorite ice cream topping?
It's got to be chocolate fudge. It's hands down. I mean, how can you go wrong with chocolate fudge?
How can you go wrong? That's right. So many different ice creams you could put that on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sounds like an all-around winner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, awesome, Sam. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us today from Cleveland, taking some time away from the .NET Study Group, the Azure Cleveland User Group. Writing. Is Visual Studio Magazine still around? That's a little bit embarrassing. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that question.
They are alive and well.
Wow.
Also, you forgot to shamelessly plug the Cleveland C# VB.NET User Group.
There we go. Yes.
Still meets monthly online.
There we go. All of that, and working with NIS Technologies. So thanks for being here and chatting with us. MVP. Oh, so I guess now I get to mourn, right? So I finally heard back, Kevin. So this is how bad it is, right? You're talking about my life on the D list. So I finally applied. It said it's supposed to get back to you in 90 days. I started hearing people, hey, MVP. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I didn't meet the window, right? Whatever. The second one goes out, MVP. I'm like, what the heck? At least I want to know. Like, you at least have to tell me. So I had to go to the page, and I'm like, hey guys, I put in my application. It's been like 6 months. Y'all need to, like, sorry, you didn't make it. I'm like, oh man, that's rough. So thank
Maybe
you
next
for
time.
descending down and speaking with us, mere mortals.
Oh, you're welcome.
Keep applying, Carlos.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Keep applying.
There we go. Okay, if folks want to reach out to you on social media, how can they do so?
So you can find me on Twitter at Sam Nasr. You can find me on LinkedIn also. Last name is Nasr. And I'll give you my direct email, samnasr@live.com. If there's anything I can do to help, get you started with Azure Cognitive Services, answer any questions on getting involved into software development, speaking, writing articles, what have you, I'm more than happy to help. So wanted to thank you all for having me on. Been a lot of fun. Great connecting with all three of you.
Yeah.
And hope to do it again soon.
Yes, awesome. So, Mr. Eugene, folks want to connect with you. How can they do so?
You can find me on Twitter at SQLGene.
And Mr. Kevin.
So if you use the Face API and you hold it up next to Carlos, it'll say a very handsome gentleman because he's not famous enough to get special recognition. Yeah. If you hold it up next to me, it'll give you my social media details because I am a very famous person.
That's right. He's reached that level.
Mr. Fiesel has a way with words, I have to say.
There is no doubt. Okay, compañeros, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. And again, if you do listen to the podcast, just make sure you mention that when you connect, and I'll be sure to respond a little bit faster. Don't forget about the t-shirt, SQLDataPartners.com/t-shirt. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you on the SQL Trail. Bye, y'all.